So I've made the review of 28 Days Later. Now it's time for 28 Weeks Later, the sequel. This was made in 2007. A different director. This time the director was Juan Carlos Fresnadillo. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Who is, I believe, a Spanish director. Who co-wrote it with Rowan Joffre, Enrique Lopez Levine, and Jesus Olmo. Not 100% sure about those pronunciations. This had a slightly bigger budget of 15 million and it grossed 64 million, so slightly less gross than 28 Days Later. Like I said, it was released in 2007 and it stars Robert Carlyle, Rose Byrne, Jeremy Renner, Harold Perrineau, Catherine McCormick, Imogen Poots, Macintosh Muggleton, and Idris Elba. Um, Now, like I said, this is made 5 years later, and basically the film is set, as the title implies, 28 weeks after the events of the first film. Um, and it begins in a rural cottage where there is a group of survivors, an elderly couple, um, two young guys, a younger couple, a young guy, a young woman who is still reminiscing over her absent boyfriend, and they're sort of dealing with this aftermath. They have no electricity. They've got limited supplies. It's quite a somber sort of atmosphere. They get a knock on the door. The little boy shows up, who doesn't have the virus, but he's famished, and it transpires he's come from a nearby settlement. Well, needless to say, the infected attack the cottage, and basically everyone except the character played by Robert Carlyle is attacked. And he looks back and sees his wife screaming at the window, played by Catherine McCormick, who viewers may know from Braveheart. She played Mirren in Braveheart. But basically, that's quite a dramatic scene. He's running away, and you can see these rampaging infected. They're never called zombies in either film. The rampaging infected are running across the field. He gets to the barge on the river. The other guy, Jacob, is there. And one thing I like about that scene, it shows the sort of social tensions. It's the character Jacob kind of berates the young woman for still believing her boyfriend will turn up. So it shows the sort of social tensions you would get in this sort of situation. Well, anyway, the character Jacob is attacked, and Robert Carlyle's character, who I believe is called, let me just get this correct, Dom, is he flees away in the boat, obviously utterly out of breath, and he gets to London. So it shows, actually, I should say, then it pans to 28 weeks later, excuse me, and it basically shows that Britain, the whole island, is in quarantine. The American military has taken over, and just like the impressive sort of scene in the first film with Cillian Murphy wandering the empty streets of London, which, by the way, was filmed around half 4 a.m. That's the only time London is semi-quiet, apart from now, of course. Um, it kind of showed this kind of dystopian scene of empty London and the famous landmarks, London Eye, Big Ben, and so on. And it's quite well done, I thought. But basically, the American military has taken over, and they kind of have these safe zones, and the whole city is quarantined. It's an American-led NATO mission. Um, so they assume that at this point the infected have starved off, and basically, Robert Carlyle's character Don is reunited with his two teenage children, or rather, the little boy we assumed about 12, the girl's about 15 or 16, and they're reunited. Him and his wife basically paid for a holiday uh, that they got away from Britain, and they are really relieved by that. But basically, this is they're now living in District One, which is a safe zone in the Isle of Dogs, guarded by the U.S. Army. Um, so we introduce new characters in this film. Rose Byrne is a military scientist, Scarlet. Jeremy Renner is Doyle, who's a sort of marksman, I guess, and he's a Delta Force sniper. And his friend Chief Flynn, who is played by Harold Perrineau. and we see Idris Elba play military commander, Brigadier General Stone. So basically, to cut a long story short, we assume that Robert Carlyle's wife has died, and he's kind of beset by guilt by over this, but he kind of has a role of a security guard in this new District One. His wife's known as Alice, and she has survived and she is infected. However, she isn't displaying the symptoms of other people. So she may be patient X, or she may have special blood, as this military scientist, um, Rose Byrne, playing Scarlet, speculates. So in one scene, Robert Carlyle's character Don goes into the room. He kisses his wife very naively, and this is after a scene where he berates his children for going out despite the quarantine, and they go to their old house. So as he's berating them, the daughter, played by Imogen Poots, angrily asks her father that you said she was dead, and he's confused. He just assumed that she was. So there's a lot of dynamic going on with this family. Um, but basically, to cut a long story short, Robert Carlyle's character Don then gets infected, and he then unleashes this virus or re-releases the virus onto London, and it ends up with a code red situation where the American military kind of order a shoot to kill policy, initially of the infected, but then of basically anyone in sight because they cannot tell the infected from the uninfected. However, one soldier, Doyle, played by Jeremy Renner, goes rogue along with Scarlett, and they, along with these two children, um, played Imogen Poots playing Tammy, and her younger brother, I believe, Raymond Waring, is playing Sam. Um, so they then need to escape London, and there's a kind of lockdown situation. The whole city is beset by a flamethrower. They eventually get to Wembley Stadium after they're in a fairground, and another survivor kind of frantically tries to get onto the helicopter, and he's thrown off because privates, or rather the Delta Marine Force sniper, Jeremy Renner's character Doyle, has begged his friend Flynn to take them. Flynn is very reluctant to do this. And when this guy kind of grabs Erla, actually that's Sam, I should say. Excuse me, I'm mixing up the characters a little bit. Raymond Waring playing Sam kind of frantically grabs the helicopter, he's thrown off, and then the rotor blades are used to cut up the remaining infected. But basically, to cut a long story short, the one remaining survivor, Flynn, does take the children to Paris, and that's kind of where we see the film end, and we assume that the characters of Scarlett, Doyle, Alice, her husband Don, played by Robert Carlyle, they all die. So the only survivors are Flynn, who's this pilot, and the two children, Tammy and her brother Andy, played by Macintosh Muggleton. And basically, we see the film end with a sort of broken English transmission with a French accent, and we see the infected running into up a subway pass, and we see the Eiffel Tower. So the insinuation is they have then got to Paris and on to continental Europe. So how does this compare to 28 Days Later? It's still got quite good reviews from critics, although I feel it's let me see. There was one critical review where, let me just get this. Yeah, one reviewer said it lacked the heart of the first film. It lacked the sort of humanity of the first film. I'm not sure I'd entirely agree with that. I think we do build up a sort of connection with this family. So I'm not so sure about that. Certainly, the second film has a bigger cast. I mean, there's, for example, in the Code Red scene, we're seeing hundreds of extras. So, and it's an urban scene, whereas the first film is semi-rural and it's in a military base outside Manchester rather than being in a big city. Um, The director, I should say, that said, let me get this, if you just bear with me a second. Um, Danny Boyle and producer Andrew McDonald were interested in making a sequel, um, but Boyle revealed he would not be directing due to commitments on Sunshine, which also starred Cillian Murphy and was released in 2007. Boyle later hired Spanish filmmaker Juan Carlos Fresnadillo, believing he would be able to bring a fresh new perspective to the film. Another reason he picked Fresnadillo was because he was a huge fan of his 2001 film Intacto. Um, Fresnadillo felt the plot involving the family in Roe and Joffre's original script was underdeveloped, so he decided to rewrite it with collaborators Enrique Lopez Levine and Jesus Olmo. Although both Fresnadillo and Lopez Levine were unimpressed with the initial draft, they found its concept of the family trying to start over after the first outbreak a redeemable aspect, deciding to retain it in the rewritten version. Rewriting took almost a year, with Garland making additional input into the script. If you just bear with me, um, on review aggregated Rotten Tomatoes, the film has generated a rating of 71%, so it's still done quite well for a sequel. Um, the website consensus states, while 28 weeks later lacks the humanism that made 28 Days Later a classic, it's made up with fantastic atmospheric and punchy fantastic atmosphere and punchy direction. I certainly agree with the atmosphere, and I think the direction was good. On Metacritic, has a weighted average of 78 out of 100, based on 34 critics, indicating a generally favourable reviews. The New York Times' A.O. Scott remarked that it is brutal and almost exhaustingly terrifying, as any respectable zombie movie should be. It is also, bracingly smart, both in its ideas and its techniques. And it features some well-known London landmarks, like say Wembley Stadium is one notable one. And in the opening scenes, it features London Eye, it features Big Ben, it features other well-known landmarks across London. This was before Shard went up, of course. The soundtrack, as with the first film, was composed and written by John Murphy. Um, and I have to say that I would say it was a good film. Um, some of the, if I had any critique of the film, maybe some of the Code Red scene was a little bit frenetic and not in a good way. I think the directing was good. I think the acting was strong. I would say just as good as the first film. So I'm not quite sure I'd agree with that critique about lacking humanism. Um, but I thought it was well made overall, and I'd have to say it's difficult to weigh it up against 28 Days Later. I can't say it's better or worse for me. I think it's definitely a very worthy sequel. Now, there was supposed to be another sequel, a sequel on top of the sequel, to make a trilogy of 28 months later, and that would have been showing it was a worldwide pandemic. If I've any critique of the two films, it would be that the premise is a little bit unrealistic because if you have a pandemic, the idea that it would only be in Britain, for example, in 28 days later, there's a scene where one of the soldiers who's kind of on the good side, so to speak, he's not as corrupted as the others. Um, he says over the pond they're watching The Simpsons and getting back to life as normal. In a pandemic, as we've seen from coronavirus, the point of a pandemic is it spreads around the world. So the idea that something that would wipe out the entire population of Britain that wouldn't affect other countries, that's a little bit far-fetched. So I find that a little bit implausible. However, it still works well for the film, and I like the fact that both films are set in Britain. I mean, there's a very British feel to them. They're very British science fiction, and that's Danny Boyle coming through. So check them out. Here's the tagline of 28 Weeks Later: Eradication, Repopulation, Reinfection. But strong cast. I just wish they'd made the 28 months later. That would have been dealing with a more worldwide situation, presumably following the story on in France. It can still be done. And I would say at this time when we're all in lockdown, clearly we're not having infected roaming the streets, but we are in lockdown and we are having to stay at home. So the streets in central London and in other big cities are going to somewhat resemble the streets in these films. So it's a little bit notable, let's just say. If you look at any clips from these films online, people are saying "bit in 2020," so that's interesting. It shows the kind of iconic status these films have, particularly 28 Days Later. So yeah, check them out. 28 Days Later, 28 Weeks Later. Um, and I think that's what I could say about the second film. Um, it was distributed by 20th Century Fox and Fox Atomic in the US. Okay, I shall leave it there. Let me know your thoughts if you've seen either of these films.